She had nothing with her but a blanket, a broken-down car, and a fake name, and by the time he found out the truth, it was already too late to guard his heart. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sky was still the color of charcoal when Caleb unlocked the side gate to his garage, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. Morning in Maple Hollow didn't come with sirens or traffic, just a few distant crows, the creak of old trees and the low hiss of steam rising from frost-covered rooftops. He was early, earlier than usual, drawn out of bed by the kind of restlessness he couldn't quite name. But as he rounded the back lot, he stopped cold. There was a car, not just any car, a sleek dark silver coupe tucked between the fence and the shop wall, its front end angled just enough to reveal the popped hood and the faint glow of dead headlights. Caleb squinted through the haze. The windshield was fogged, the windows sealed. Then he noticed it, a shape in the front seat, unmoving. He approached slowly, every step deliberate, careful not to spook whoever was inside. When he reached the driver's side, he tapped the glass gently. Nothing. Then again. This time the figure stirred. The woman blinked, startled, her eyes darting toward him. She looked young, maybe late 20s, but worn at the edges. Her long dark hair was pulled into a messy braid, and a wool blanket was wrapped around her shoulders like armor. For a second she looked afraid, but then she cracked the window. "Sorry," she murmured, voice hoarse. "Didn't mean to trespass." Caleb held up a hand. "You okay?" She hesitated. "Car died. I didn't want to wake anyone up. Mind if I take a look?" A pause, then a nod. He moved around to the front, lifting the hood. The battery cable was loose, barely hanging on. A few other parts looked worn, but nothing he couldn't fix. As he worked, he kept glancing at her through the windshield. She didn't look like someone used to sleeping in her car. And she definitely didn't look like she belonged in this quiet little town. By the time he got the battery reconnected, the sun had started to rise, streaking the sky with pale pink. He walked back to her window, brushing off his hands. "Should be able to get it started now," he said. She looked up at him with tired, grateful eyes. "Thanks. I'm Lena." Caleb smiled faintly. "I'm Caleb. You hungry?" The name sat too easily on her tongue, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Lena," she said again, as if reinforcing it for herself more than for him. No last name. No mention of where she was from or where she was headed. Just Lena, wrapped in a blanket that didn't look like it belonged to her, sitting behind the wheel of a luxury car that hadn't seen proper care in months. Caleb nodded slowly, filing away the oddity. He'd met a lot of people passing through Maple Hollow, some honest, some running, some just lost. But Lena didn't fit neatly into any of those boxes. She looked like someone who knew the weight of secrets. Not dangerous, just heavy. "You got a phone?" he asked casually as they stepped inside the garage's office, trying to keep the air between them light. She shook her head. "Lost it a few towns back." He replied, not buying it but not saying so. He handed her a mug of coffee instead, the chipped ceramic warm against her frozen fingers. She gripped it like it might anchor her. Her eyes drifted to the photo on his desk. Him and Emily at last year's county fair, faces streaked with powdered sugar and laughter. "Your daughter?" "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "Emily, she's 7. Thinks she's 25. Lena smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't ask for a charger, didn't ask to use the phone, didn't even ask how much the repair would cost. Instead, she sat quietly, sipping her coffee, like it was the first warm thing she'd had in days. Caleb leaned against the doorway and watched her. The car outside was registered to someone named Everett, but he didn't mention it. Not yet. He'd learned a long time ago that people come clean in their own time, if they come clean at all. "You planning on sticking around a while?" he asked. She met his gaze, unreadable, "just until the car runs again." He nodded again, slower this time. "Well," he said, "you're welcome to wait here. It's warm, and I won't ask too many questions." Her thanks was quiet, almost embarrassed. And Caleb, despite every red flag fluttering in the back of his mind, simply poured her another cup. The diner sat at the edge of town, a squat building with fogged windows and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like it was tired of trying. Caleb hadn't planned on breakfast out, but when Lena's stomach growled audibly in the garage, he gestured toward his truck with a quiet, "Come on." She didn't argue, just gathered her blanket like a shield and followed him into the cold. Inside, the place smelled like bacon grease, burnt toast, and the kind of coffee that tasted like it had been simmering since the 90s. They slid into a booth by the window, though there wasn't much to see but frost-slicked sidewalks and the rusting metal of old pickup trucks. Lena didn't say much. Caleb didn't either. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was cautious. Two people from different planets sharing the same table, pretending that eggs and pancakes could bridge the gap. When the waitress arrived, Lena scanned the menu like she didn't recognize half the items. Caleb watched her over the rim of his mug. "Try the breakfast special," he said. "It's not pretty, but it sticks." She glanced at him, then at the waitress. "I'll have that. And, orange juice?" Her voice wavered, as if ordering felt like a luxury. When the food arrived, scrambled eggs, toast, hash browns, and 3 thick strips of bacon, Lena hesitated for a beat before digging in. Not rushed, not rude, just hungry. The kind of hunger that made you forget to talk. Caleb noticed how she closed her eyes on the first bite like her body remembered what warmth felt like. "So," he finally said, "you said you're just passing through?" She nodded, not looking up. "Yeah? Heading west. Family out there?" "No." He let the word hang. She didn't add more. "I'm not trying to pry," he said after a beat, "but you don't seem like the kind of person who breaks down behind a mechanic's shop by accident." She met his gaze then, eyes clear but guarded. "Maybe I needed to stop." And that was all she said. Caleb didn't push. He just refilled her coffee and passed the syrup across the table as the silence between them settled into something that didn't need fixing. Back at the garage, the cold still clung to the walls, but the heater had finally kicked in, humming low and steady like a comfort Caleb didn't know he needed. Lena stood near the car, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes tracing every inch of the place as if trying to figure out where she was safe to stand. Caleb grabbed the tow dolly from behind the shop, hitching it up without a word. The car wasn't going far, just around to the main bay. But he wanted to do it right. He always did. That's what his father taught him. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing well, even if no one's watching. "You don't have to tow it," she said softly. "I can push it with you." Caleb glanced at her. "And let you break your back for no reason? Nah, I've got this." She nodded and stepped aside, watching. Once the car was in the bay and he had the hood propped open again, he started running diagnostics out loud, half out of habit, half for her benefit. "Battery's shot," he muttered. "Alternator's not in great shape either. Fuel line's a little temperamental. Could be condensation from the cold." She stood nearby, holding her coffee like it was a lifeline. "How much is this going to cost?" Caleb didn't look up. "I'll take care of it." She blinked. "Wait, what?" "I said I'll take care of it. You don't owe me anything." Her eyes narrowed, but not with anger. Confusion. "No, I can't just let you fix it for free. I can pay you. I should pay you." He finally turned to her, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm not doing this for the money. Kindness isn't a transaction, Lena." She looked at him like she was seeing a ghost, or a myth, like maybe she wasn't sure people like him existed anymore. "You really don't want anything?" He shook his head. "Just pay it forward, that's enough." She didn't speak after that, just stood there in the warmth of the garage, surrounded by tools and grease and a man who offered help like it was as ordinary as breathing. And, maybe, for him, it was. The sun was beginning its slow descent by the time Caleb finished with her car for the day. The engine hummed quietly under the hood, patched, functional, but not perfect. Kind of like the woman standing beside it, her arms crossed tightly, eyes scanning the horizon as if waiting for something she couldn't name. "You've got heat again," Caleb said, wiping his hands. "Should hold you a while." "Thanks," she replied, that guarded politeness back in her voice. He hesitated before adding, "You're welcome to crash on the couch at my place. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe." Her eyes met his, not with offense, but something close to pride. She shook her head. "No, thank you. You've already done enough." He didn't argue. A few minutes later, she pulled into the lot of Maple Hollow's only motel, a squat row of rooms with flickering porch lights and a buzzing Coke machine that hadn't worked since 2009. Caleb waited across the street in his truck, engine idling low, watching as she stepped into the office. Through the window, he saw her count out cash from her wallet, slowly, carefully, like every bill mattered more than she wanted to admit. The clerk handed her a single key. One night. Caleb waited until she disappeared into room 6 before stepping inside himself. "Hey, Dave," he said casually to the guy behind the desk. Dave looked up from his crossword. "Caleb, what's up?" The woman who just checked in, add 2 more nights, quietly. "She doesn't need to know." Dave raised an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" Caleb shrugged. "Something like that." He handed over his card. "Just do it." Dave slid the register over without another word. When Caleb left, he didn't look back at the motel. Didn't want to. It wasn't about being seen. It wasn't about anything, really, except maybe the way she held herself, like the world was too heavy, and she was too proud to let it show. Back home, Emily was already asleep, her tiny hand clutching the corner of the blanket. Caleb stood in the doorway for a while, wondering why a stranger's quiet hurt had settled into his chest like it belonged there. The house was quiet except for the gentle creak of the floorboards as Caleb tiptoed past the living room. The heat clicked on with a soft whoosh, filling the small space with a familiar hum. Upstairs, Emily was already tucked in, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the blankets and the remnants of a long day. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, watching her trace lazy circles on the pillow with one finger, her eyes heavy but not yet closed. "Did you fix her car?" she asked, voice soft and sleepy. "Mostly," Caleb replied, stepping inside and sitting on the edge of the bed. "She's staying at the motel tonight." Emily blinked at him. Why didn't she go home? He smoothed the blanket over her. Maybe she doesn't have one right now. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then, turning toward him, she asked, "Why did she look so sad?" Caleb paused. The question caught him harder than he expected. He thought about the way Lena, if that was even her name, stood in the garage like a statue, like someone bracing against a storm that had already passed but still echoed. He remembered the look in her eyes, the way she clutched her coffee cup like it was the last warm thing in her life. But how do you explain that kind of sadness to a 7-year-old? He gave her the safest answer he could find. "Some people carry their sadness on the outside, Em. Doesn't mean they want to. It just slips out sometimes." Emily's brow furrowed. Did something bad happen to her? "I think something hard happened," Caleb said carefully. "Something that made her feel like she had to hide." Emily nodded slowly, considering that. Then she said, "Maybe we can help her not hide." Caleb smiled, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "Maybe." She yawned, already fading. "You're good at fixing things, Daddy. Maybe you can fix her, too." He sat there for a moment after she drifted off, staring at the ceiling, heart heavy. He could fix cars, engines, brakes, but people? That was a whole different machine. The garage was quiet, except for the ticking of cooling metal and the occasional clink of Caleb's wrench against the undercarriage. The rest of the town had gone to bed hours ago, wrapped in quilts and routine. But Caleb was still here, alone under flickering fluorescent lights, sleeves rolled up, grease under his nails, and his mind somewhere else entirely. He adjusted the alternator belt with practiced hands, but his thoughts weren't on the engine. They kept drifting back to her, to Lena, to the way her eyes darted around like she was constantly scanning for escape routes, to the tightness in her jaw when she smiled, like she had to remember how, to the way she said thank you like it was a phrase she didn't get to use often, or maybe didn't believe people meant when they said it to her. He sighed and reached for another socket. Caleb wasn't a man who lingered on strangers. He helped them, fixed their cars, watched them drive off, and never thought about them again. That was the job. That was the rhythm. But something about Lena snagged in the gears of his mind, refusing to let go. She'd sat in that diner booth like someone half present, polite, grateful, but guarded, like a traveler who knew any comfort was temporary. And when he offered to help, that flicker of disbelief in her eyes had said more than any backstory could. She didn't trust kindness, not really. And that got to him in a way he didn't expect. He tightened the bolts, then leaned back on the stool, rubbing the back of his neck. The shop smelled like oil and cold coffee, familiar and grounding. But her voice still echoed, soft, unsure, trying not to reveal too much. "Do you ever wish you could disappear?" He hadn't known how to answer then, still didn't, but maybe that's what this was, her way of disappearing. And maybe, just maybe, she'd landed in the one place where someone actually noticed. Caleb glanced at the door, then back at the car. She'd be driving it again soon. Probably gone before the week was up. And for reasons he couldn't explain, the thought hit harder than he liked. Morning came with the scent of dew and distant exhaust, the kind of cold that clung to your bones before the sun had a chance to fight it off. Caleb was tightening a few bolts beneath the hood when he heard the quick, uneven footsteps approaching the shop. Lena pushed through the garage door, hair pulled back in a rushed ponytail, eyes wild with something between fear and frustration. "I can't find my wallet," she said, breath shallow. "I've checked everywhere, the motel, my bag. It's gone." Caleb stood upright, wiping his hands on a rag. "All right, slow down. When was the last time you remember having it?" "Yesterday. I paid the motel clerk with it." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the panic rising fast, like it had been sitting just beneath her skin all along. "If I lost that, She didn't finish the sentence. He nodded calmly, walking past her and opening the driver's side door of the coupe. He reached under the seat, fingers brushing through dust and loose change, until he felt it, the edge of worn leather. He pulled it out slowly. "Here," he said, holding it up. Relief washed over her face so quickly it almost knocked her off balance. She took it from him with trembling hands and flipped it open. Then she froze. Caleb saw it too. The wallet was nearly empty. No cash, no cards. Just a single torn photograph tucked behind the ID window. A faded picture of a young girl in a sunflower dress, grinning up at someone who wasn't in the frame. And beneath it, the ID. He didn't recognize the name. Lena Everett, it read. But the font, the hologram, the lamination, they were off. Just enough to be wrong if you knew what to look for. And Caleb did. Her fingers closed the wallet slowly, as if she realized she hadn't hidden the truth well enough. "I must have left the rest somewhere," she mumbled. He didn't say anything, just watched her, eyes soft but searching. She turned away, folding the wallet back into her coat. "Thanks for finding it." Caleb nodded once, but the silence between them stretched a little tighter now, like a wire strung too far without snapping. The coupe purred like it remembered what it was made for, tires humming against the quiet road just outside town. The repairs held. Caleb always made sure of that. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, his eyes flicking between the road and the woman beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if even riding in a car made her tense. They hadn't said much since pulling out of the garage. Lena had offered a soft thanks when he opened the passenger door, but now her silence had stretched into something heavier. Caleb didn't mind. He'd always believed people spoke most honestly when they weren't trying to fill the quiet. The engine rolled over another curve, the town disappearing behind them, replaced by pine trees and open sky. She rolled the window down halfway, letting the cold air in, her eyes fixed on something in the distance that didn't exist. "Do you ever wish you could disappear?" she asked suddenly. Caleb didn't answer right away. The question wasn't casual, it hung between them, raw and still bleeding. He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "I think I already have." She looked at him then, really looked, like she hadn't expected a yes. "This town," he added after a beat, "it's like a slow echo. Same faces, same roads. You stop making waves after a while. People stop noticing." His voice stayed even, but something shifted behind it. "But my little girl, she keeps me here. She keeps me seen." Lena turned her gaze back to the road, the wind teasing loose strands of her hair. "I ran," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not from something. From everything. I thought, if I could just vanish for a while, maybe I'd figure out who I was without all of it." He didn't press, didn't ask what all of it meant. She wasn't ready. But as the road curved toward the old mill, he downshifted and gave her a glance. "Maybe you're not supposed to disappear," he said. "Maybe you're just supposed to be found by the right people." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The kitchen smelled like garlic bread and something bubbling in the oven. Caleb's go-to lasagna recipe, the kind that fed 3 days of leftovers and made the house feel warmer than the thermostat ever could. The table was already set, mismatched plates and all, with Emily folding paper napkins into strange little triangles while humming to herself. When Lena stepped inside, she hesitated at the doorway, as if unsure if she was meant to stay or just pass through. She wore the same jeans from earlier, a sweatshirt too big for her frame, and a look like she hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in a long, long time. Caleb noticed the pause but didn't call it out. "Hope you like cheese," he said, sliding the casserole dish onto a potholder. Emily grinned. "It's Daddy's famous lasagna. Not really famous, but I say it is." Lena smiled, tentative, soft, and sat down slowly. "I'm sure it's perfect." Dinner started quiet. Caleb asked Emily about school, and she launched into a story about a class pet turtle that escaped behind the supply closet. Lena laughed at all the right parts, but it was the kind of laugh that sounded like it hadn't been used in a while. Halfway through, Emily disappeared into her room and returned with a tiny, lopsided bracelet made of yarn and plastic beads. She held it out proudly to Lena. "I made this today. You can have it." Lena blinked, looking down at the jumbled mess of colors. It was imperfect, childish, and absolutely beautiful. She took it with trembling hands, voice thin. "Thank you, Emily. This means a lot." Emily beamed and returned to her seat. Lena slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, her fingers lingering just a little too long. A few moments later, Caleb glanced up to find her dabbing at her eyes with her sleeve. "Onions," she murmured, gesturing at the plate with a watery smile. But there were no onions in the lasagna. Caleb didn't say anything. He just refilled her glass of water and let the silence wrap around them like a blanket, soft, familiar, and for once, safe. The night settled in slow and quiet. A velvet hush draped over the backyard as stars blinked awake in the sky. Caleb moved through the motions without thinking, stacking firewood, striking the match, coaxing the flame to life until it danced softly, casting long shadows across the grass. It wasn't a grand gesture, just something he did on the colder nights when the house felt too still and his thoughts ran too loud. He brought out 2 chairs. Not because she said anything, she hadn't, but something in the way she lingered at the dinner table that evening, her fingers trailing along the rim of her glass, her eyes flicking to the window and then away again, told him she might want to be invited without words. So he didn't ask. He just set the chairs a few feet apart, angled toward the fire like 2 strangers who didn't need to face each other to feel seen. Caleb sat down, coat zipped, coffee in hand, the fire crackling low. Minutes passed. Then the screen door creaked. Lena stepped out slowly, hoodie pulled over her head, arms crossed against the chill. She didn't look at him right away. She just stood at the edge of the porch as if testing the air, the mood, the silence. Then, without a word, she stepped into the grass and took the empty chair. For a while they didn't speak. The fire popped and hissed, tossing sparks into the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then went quiet. Lena rubbed her hands together, not from cold, but from the weight of whatever she was carrying. Caleb didn't look at her. He just sipped his coffee and let the flames do the talking. After a long silence, Lena spoke, barely above a whisper. "It's nice here. Quiet." "Yeah," Caleb said, his voice steady. "Sometimes too quiet, but not tonight." She glanced at him then, a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes. Gratitude, maybe even trust. The fire kept burning, and they stayed there, two souls side by side, sharing warmth without asking for permission or forgiveness. The next morning the garage smelled like steel and fresh coffee, the air warmed by the low thrum of the space heater and the quiet shuffle of Caleb sorting tools. Lena stood nearby, arms crossed but curious, watching him work. Her sleeves were rolled up, bare wrists, no jewelry, just the faint tan line where a watch used to be. "You ever changed oil before?" Caleb asked, wiping his hands on a towel. She raised an eyebrow. "Does supervising a pit crew count?" He smirked. "Only if you got your hands dirty." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Show me." Caleb handed her the wrench and crouched beside her near the lift, pointing at the oil pan. "First, you loosen that bolt right there. Let it drain. Then we replace the filter. Simple stuff. Messy, but simple." Lena slid underneath the car beside him, her hair tied back, eyes squinting up at the bolts. Her fingers fumbled the wrench at first, too cautious, too polished. But she adjusted. And when the first drop of oil splashed onto her wrist, she flinched and laughed. A real startled laugh that echoed in the garage like it had been waiting weeks to escape. Caleb looked over at her. "You okay?" She grinned, holding up her hand, now streaked in black. "I think your car bit me." "That's how you know it likes you." She chuckled again, wiping her wrist on a rag. "You sure this isn't just a trick to get free labor?" "You caught me." They kept working side by side until the oil drained and the new filter was in place. Lena leaned back against the tool chest, breathing heavy, her clothes smudged, hands stained. She looked down at herself, then at him, shaking her head. "I used to wear suits every day," she said. "I once flew across the country for a meeting that lasted 20 minutes, and now I'm covered in grease and weirdly okay with it." Caleb handed her another rag, smiling. "Guess there's a little mechanic in you after all." She looked up at him then, something lighter in her eyes. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't seem like she was trying to disappear. It was late afternoon when she asked. The kind of golden hour that made even rusted fenders and cracked pavement glow like something sacred. Caleb was organizing invoices at the front counter, trying to remember if he'd ordered enough filters for next week, when Lena stepped out of the office, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "I've been thinking," she said, voice low but clear. "Maybe I could stick around a little. Help out, cleaning, answering phones, filing stuff." Caleb looked up, caught off guard. She wasn't someone who asked for things, not help, not space, definitely not a job. Her posture gave her away, shoulders back, chin high, but her fingers tugged nervously at the hem of her sleeve. "You sure?" he asked gently. "Doesn't exactly pay in gold bars." She shrugged, glancing away. "Doesn't have to. I don't feel like driving off yet. Not today." He studied her for a moment, the way her walls were still up but softer. How she stood there waiting, not like someone applying for a job, but like someone hoping not to be turned away again. Truth was, He didn't need help. Business was slow, and Emily was better at sorting mail than half the people he'd paid before. But needing and wanting weren't the same thing. Caleb nodded. "All right, you're hired. But fair warning, I've got high standards when it comes to organizing spark plugs." She smiled, that small, reluctant smile that never quite reached full brightness, but always lingered a little longer than the one before. "I'll do my best." "Start tomorrow?" "I'll be here." They didn't say anything more. She grabbed a broom and began sweeping the corner near the parts shelf without waiting for direction. Caleb watched her for a moment, the quiet rhythm of bristles on concrete filling the space between them. She wasn't running, not today, and maybe that meant something. He went back to his paperwork, pen tapping against the page, heart thudding just a little louder than before. The whispers started at the gas station. Quiet at first, tucked between weather complaints and football scores, but curiosity in a town like Maple Hollow didn't stay quiet for long. One moment Lena was just a stranger passing through. The next, she was a mystery rooted in routine. Every morning arriving at Caleb's shop in the same old coupe, every afternoon leaving with smudges of grease on her sleeves and something softer in her eyes. At Norma's cafe, Mrs. Daughtry stirred her tea with a smirk and said, "That woman at the garage, she doesn't dress like she's from around here." Across the booth, Pastor Lee raised a brow. "She carries herself like someone used to being followed, not forgotten." At the feed store, Hank told a customer, "That's not just a friend. Caleb's never let anyone touch the invoice drawer, not even his cousin who ran the place last summer." And at the elementary school pickup line, Emily mentioned to her teacher, "Lena's funny." She said she never made macaroni art before. By the next morning, it was town gospel that Caleb's mystery helper had never been near a glue stick in her life. Even Dave from the motel joined the speculation. "She paid for one night. Someone else paid for the next two. She walks to the garage every day like she belongs there, but she's got that look, like she's hiding something." But for all the talk, no one really knew anything. She didn't join church socials, didn't chat at the diner counter, didn't give a last name or volunteer stories about where she was from. She smiled politely, kept her head down, and swept the garage floors like her life depended on staying invisible. Yet, that only made people look harder. Caleb didn't answer questions. He nodded when people asked how business was, grunted when someone nudged about the girl, and kept his mouth shut when the barbershop gossip spun her into a runaway heiress, a private detective, or a criminal in disguise. Let them talk, he thought. If people wanted a story, they'd make one. But the truth? The truth was Lena was still figuring out who she was, right here, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the judgment of a town that watched everything. The sharp black sedan pulled into the garage lot just after noon, sleek, spotless, and so out of place it might as well have dropped from the sky. Caleb was under the hood of a Buick, the radio humming softly behind him, when the engine shut off with a precise click. He looked up just as the driver's door opened. The man who stepped out didn't belong here. Tailored charcoal suit, polished shoes that had never touched gravel, a silver watch that gleamed even in the shade. He scanned the lot with a kind of efficiency that said he wasn't lost, he was hunting. Caleb straightened, wiping his hands slowly. "Help you with something?" The man's gaze landed on him, assessing. "I'm looking for someone. Ms. Malene Sinclair. I believe she may have passed through recently." The name hit harder than Caleb expected, even though a part of him had already guessed. Still, hearing it out loud sent a cold ripple through his chest. He kept his expression blank, neutral. "Don't know anyone by that name," he said, voice steady. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't push. He pulled out a photo from the inside of his coat, crisp, full color, not the kind of thing people just carried around. It was Lena, but not the one who worked the front desk and swept floors in his garage. This was a version of her from another world. Blazer, heels, hair neatly twisted back, power in every line of her stance. "She may be going by something else, traveling alone. If you see her, I'd appreciate a call." He handed Caleb a sleek business card, white embossed letters, no logo, just a name and number. Sinclair Motors. Caleb took the card without looking at it and tucked it into his back pocket. "Sure." The man glanced around once more, then slid back into his car, doors sealing with a soft mechanical thud. Seconds later the sedan pulled out, tires barely making a sound. From the shadows near the back office, Lena stepped out, eyes wide, face pale. "I saw the car," she said quietly. "Did he see me?" "No," Caleb replied, "but he's looking for you." She nodded, lips pressed tight. "I need to leave." Caleb didn't try to stop her, not yet, but something in his chest twisted painfully, like a bolt turned too far. The storm came in fast that night, wind howling through the cracks in the garage door, rain hammering the roof like it had a score to settle. Caleb stayed late, finishing paperwork while the storm passed. Lena had gone home early, or at least back to the motel, with shadows under her eyes and her voice a little quieter than usual. Ever since the man in the suit had shown up, she'd been more guarded, even with Emily. He was cleaning up when he noticed it, a small black notebook wedged between the file cabinet and the break room wall, probably slipped out of her bag sometime during the week. It was unmarked, worn at the edges, and held together by a rubber band that had seen better days. He hesitated, fingers resting on the cover. It wasn't his place, he knew that, but something tugged at him, not just curiosity, something closer to concern and maybe a little hope. He peeled off the band and opened it. The first pages were diagrams, neat, technical, drawn with precision, engine layouts unlike anything he'd seen before, notes in the margins about emissions, fuel flow, electric integration, efficiency ratios, the kind of thing only someone brilliant and deeply passionate would bother sketching by hand. As he flipped further, the drawings changed. Crayon-colored mock-ups of children's science kits, pages labeled "Build Your Own Engine," with little cartoon wrenches and simplified instructions, diagrams of toys that taught combustion principles, kits for teaching torque and balance. One page had stick figures of kids smiling beside what looked like a makeshift garage. Toward the back, it got more personal, a 2-page spread titled "The Garage I Wish Existed," hand-drawn blueprints of a modest building, a shop that looked a lot like his, but with big glass windows, an open waiting area, and words scribbled in block letters along the top. Honest mechanics, fair pay, no judgments. Caleb sat down, notebook resting in his lap like it weighed more than paper should. She wasn't just running, she was dreaming, building something inside her, even while the outside of her life cracked apart. And for the first time since she walked into his world, Caleb realized something deeper than mystery was keeping her close. She wasn't lost, she was rebuilding. Emily turned 8 on a Saturday morning that smelled like frosting and late spring rain. Caleb had planned something small, just a few friends from school, a store-bought cake, and a backyard that still had patches of winter mud clinging to the corners. But somehow, with Lena's quiet touch, it became something more. She didn't take over, she just offered, like she always did, with that soft voice and steady hands. She baked cupcakes with real buttercream, helped Emily decorate paper crowns, and strung lights along the fence until the backyard looked like a slice of magic, carved from ordinary things. Caleb watched her from the kitchen window, sleeves rolled, hair braided down her back, laughing as she let Emily smear frosting on her cheek. It wasn't a sound he was used to hearing from her, not cautious or measured, but full, bright, alive. The kids played tag between the trees, and the parents made small talk over lemonade. Caleb stayed near the grill, flipping burgers, pretending he didn't notice how many times his eyes drifted back to her. Then came the moment he hadn't expected. When the candles had been blown out and the presents half unwrapped, Lena handed Emily a gift wrapped in brown paper and twine. It was light, thin, handled with a kind of reverence that made Emily go quiet for once as she peeled it open. Inside was a handmade book, fabric-bound, its pages thick with texture. On each page, a drawing, a story. Emily the Engineer, the title read in Lena's looping handwriting. Each page showed Emily building something, fixing a spaceship, inventing a scooter that ran on wind, creating a robot that made pancakes. The final illustration showed Emily in a garage with stars in the windows and her dad smiling beside her. Emily stared at it, then looked up. "You made this?" Lena nodded. "I thought you might like to see yourself as the hero." Caleb's throat tightened. Because this wasn't charity. It wasn't an adult humoring a child. It was someone who saw his daughter, who saw what mattered, who gave pieces of herself not because she had to, but because something in her wanted to. And for the first time, Caleb realized he wasn't just falling for a mystery. He was falling for the way she loved. The fire crackled low, its glow casting long shadows across the backyard as the night deepened into something intimate and still. Crickets chirped in the distance, the wind whispered through the trees, and the rest of the world had gone quiet. Just two chairs, the scent of smoke in the air, and the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Lena sat with her knees drawn up, wrapped in one of Caleb's old flannel blankets. Her eyes traced the flames, lost in thought. Caleb leaned back in his chair, a beer untouched in his hand, watching her more than the fire. He wasn't sure how long they'd been out there. An hour? Maybe 2. But time had stopped being something he kept track of around her. They hadn't said much. They never needed to. But tonight, something hung heavier between them. Not tension exactly, something slower, closer. "I used to hate quiet," she said suddenly, her voice soft. "I filled every hour with meetings, people, calls, noise, anything to keep from hearing myself think." He turned toward her slightly, his tone just above a murmur. "And now? Now I think it's the only thing that ever tells the truth." She looked at him then, and the firelight caught the amber in her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Caleb shifted in his chair, leaning toward her, not fast, not eager, just drawn, as if whatever had been building between them had finally leaned forward too. Her breath hitched, barely audible. She didn't pull away, not at first. But just before the distance closed, she turned her face, and his lips brushed her cheek instead. "I can't," she whispered, her voice a frayed thread. "I'm not who you think I am." He pulled back slowly, not angry, not embarrassed, just aware of how much she wanted to stay hidden, of how much it cost her to almost be known. "I never asked you to be anyone," he said quietly. She nodded, staring into the fire again. "But one day you will, and I don't know if I'll be brave enough to answer." They sat like that for a while, close but not touching, hearts leaning but hands still apart. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind Caleb had grown used to around her, but the kind that felt hollow, emptied of presence, like a room after the music stops. He noticed it when the shop bell didn't ring at 9. She always showed up early, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with questions about carburetors, always with that quiet resolve like she was building something invisible with each day she stayed. But that morning, there was nothing. By 10, he checked the break room. No bag, no notebook, just the faint memory of her laughter lingering in the air. By noon, he was at the motel. Room 6, door cracked open. The bed made, untouched since early morning. The closet empty, the drawers bare, no note. The front desk clerk shrugged. She checked out before sunrise, didn't say much, just handed over the key and walked off. "Did she take a cab?" Caleb asked. "Nope, no car, just walked." Caleb stood in the lot for a long minute, staring at the empty space where her coupe should have been. But the car was still in his garage, hood open, half the engine disassembled for a tune-up they'd planned to finish together. She hadn't even taken it. Back at the shop, he opened the driver's side door, hoping maybe, something. A note, a reason, a sign. but the seat was bare. The glove box held only a single gum wrapper. The notebook she'd left behind once before was gone. He sat in the driver's seat, closed his eyes, and let the weight settle. She hadn't just left. She had erased herself. Like a ghost who'd lingered too long in someone else's warmth and remembered too late that she didn't belong in the light. He rested his hand on the steering wheel, thumb brushing the edge of the leather she once clutched nervously. She was gone, not in anger, not in fear, just gone, and all that remained was her silence. The days blurred after that. Mornings came with the same gray light slanting through the garage windows, the same radio playing country songs with too much twang, the same coffee that never quite tasted right. But something had shifted. The air felt heavier. The silence stretched longer. And Caleb moved through it like a man trying to outpace a shadow he couldn't shake. He threw himself into repairs, clutches, alternators, brake lines, engines pulled and rebuilt with a kind of precision that bordered on punishment. Anything to keep his hands busy. Anything to keep his mind from wandering back to her. But it didn't work. Not really. Because everything reminded him. The coffee mugs in the break room, hers still in the sink. The stack of invoices on the desk, her handwriting neat and methodical on the top few. The half-finished tune-up on the coupe, tools still sitting beside it like she'd just stepped out for air and never came back. Emily noticed, too. "Is Lena sick?" she asked one night at dinner, pushing peas around her plate. She didn't say goodbye. Caleb paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "No, sweetheart, she just had to go." "Will she come back?" He didn't have an answer, so he just said, "I don't know." Emily nodded like she understood, but her eyes stayed on the bracelet Lena had given her, the one she now refused to take off, even at bedtime. At the shop, customers came and went. The town kept talking, theories rising and falling like smoke in the wind. But Caleb kept his head down, fixed what was broken. Didn't talk about the car that sat untouched in the back corner gathering dust. Some days he told himself it didn't matter, that people leave, that maybe she was never meant to stay. But then he'd catch himself looking up every time the door chimed, and every time it wasn't her, the ache settled in deeper, back to just metal and grease. But even in all that noise and work, Caleb knew he wasn't fixing anything that really needed fixing. The letter from the landlord came folded in thirds, slipped under the garage door like an afterthought. Caleb found it the morning after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, counting problems instead of sheep. He unfolded it slowly, hoping it was routine, something fixable. It wasn't. The rent was going up, not by a little, enough to choke him. The letter was typed, cold, impersonal. A necessary adjustment due to market inflation. No apology, no room for negotiation, just a new number, in bold at the bottom, one that made his stomach twist. He sat on the stool by the workbench, elbows on his knees, holding the paper like it might bite. Emily's backpack was still sitting by the door, a crayon drawing sticking out of the zipper. Her latest garage spaceship, as she called it. And that somehow made the weight heavier. He ran the numbers again. Rent, utilities, parts, the broken radiator on their old sedan, Emily's school supplies, groceries, everything stacked like bricks on his chest. And still no Lena. He hadn't realized just how much she'd lightened the place until it started to feel this dark without her. That evening, after closing, he stayed late again, not working, just sitting in the stillness. No radio, no tools, just the hum of the heater and the whispering echo of everything that wasn't being said. Then the mail slot clinked. A single envelope slid across the floor. No name, no return address. Just his shop's address, handwritten in soft blue ink. Caleb picked it up cautiously, heart already racing. He opened it. Inside was a cashier's check, $50,000. He blinked, looked again. It didn't change, no explanation, no note. except one line written on a small slip of paper tucked behind the check. For the man who helped me without asking why. His breath caught. He looked out into the night, into the empty street, as if somehow she might be there, watching, waiting. But the street was still. Just him, a check, and the feeling that maybe she wasn't gone after all. Not really. The check sat on the workbench like something sacred, like it didn't belong in a place that smelled of motor oil and rust. Caleb hadn't moved it since last night. He'd read the note a dozen times, tracing the curve of each letter, searching for clues in the handwriting, as if ink could carry fingerprints of emotion. For the man who helped me without asking why. That was it. No signature, no forwarding address, no phone number, just those 11 words. He leaned against the bench, arms folded, staring at the piece of paper like it might vanish if he blinked too long. $50,000, enough to pay the rent spike, enough to fix the truck, enough to breathe. It didn't make sense. He didn't need it to. The moment he'd seen the handwriting, he knew. There was only one person it could be, only one who left without a sound, and still managed to shake the earth beneath him. Lena. Or Malene. Whoever she really was, the name didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she hadn't forgotten. She hadn't disappeared entirely. She was still out there, still watching, still carrying whatever it was they had between them in the quiet corners of her life. He picked up the note again, thumb brushing the edge. It wasn't a payment. It wasn't a thank you wrapped in a dollar sign. It was her way of reaching back without being seen. He could feel her in it, the way she always gave without fanfare, the way she tried to disappear, even when she wanted to stay, the way she carried guilt like luggage, but still made space to care for others. Emily wandered in mid-morning, lunchbox in one hand, her sketchbook in the other. "Daddy, why are you staring at a piece of paper?" Caleb looked up, smiling faintly, just thinking. She walked over, resting her chin on the bench to look at the check. "Is that from Lena?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think it is." Emily grinned. "I knew she'd come back, even if it's just a little." And somehow those words felt truer than anything he'd said in weeks. The bar was half empty, just the regulars nursing cheap beer and pretending the world outside didn't exist. Caleb sat at the far end, a basket of untouched fries in front of him and a glass of water sweating in his hand. He didn't come here often, but tonight the house had felt too quiet, too full of ghosts and memories that didn't knock before walking in. The TV above the bar was tuned to a business channel, the volume low, captions rolling across the bottom. He wasn't paying attention, at least not until a familiar face flashed on the screen. His heart stuttered. Malene Sinclair, hair pulled back into a sleek bun, makeup precise, shoulders square in a navy blazer. She looked like a woman who had never once stood barefoot on cracked garage concrete or eaten diner eggs at a wobbly table. But her eyes, those were the same, still holding that searching softness, still hiding more than they let show. Caleb stared, frozen. The banner beneath her read, Sinclair Motors. CEO returns after private sabbatical. The interviewer leaned in, smiling too widely. "So, Malene, this unexpected time away, care to share what inspired it?" She smiled, tired, honest. "I needed to remember why I started. Somewhere along the way, success became noise. I forgot what quiet looked like, what real connection feels like." He leaned closer. "I wanted to see if kindness still exists when there's nothing to gain. If people help without knowing who you are. If they mean it." She paused, voice softer. "And I found it. In a small town. In people who didn't ask for anything back." The screen cut to archival footage of her at a press conference, shaking hands, stepping into a luxury car. But Caleb barely noticed. She was talking about him. She never said his name, didn't need to. Somewhere between the gears and grease and lasagna and late-night fires, she'd taken everything she couldn't say and folded it into that sabbatical, and now the world was watching her tell a story they'd never understand. But Caleb did. He finished his water, stood slowly, and left the bar without a word. She'd left him silence. But now, finally, she was speaking. Caleb didn't make it out the door before something on the TV pulled him back. He turned, drawn like gravity had shifted, and looked up again. The interviewer had moved on to a new question, something polished and rehearsed about market growth and future investments. But none of that mattered, because there it was, on her wrist, Emily's bracelet. Bright plastic beads strung together with frayed pink yarn, some of them backwards, one missing entirely, a crooked little heart bead near the center. A child's creation, fragile and loud in its innocence. And there it sat, just below the edge of Maline's tailored blazer, peeking out with no apology. His breath caught in his throat. It didn't belong in her world of boardrooms and television lights. It clashed with her diamond earrings, with her calm authority, with the entire polished image she had rebuilt since leaving Maple Hollow. But she wore it anyway. On national television, she hadn't taken it off. He stared for a long moment, everything else around him blurring out. The bartender, wiping glasses, the low murmur of conversation, the glow of neon signs behind him. None of it registered. All he could see was that little band of color clinging to her wrist, like a secret only he and Emily knew the meaning of. She hadn't let go, not of him, not of Emily, not of the truth they built in silence. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a grand gesture. But to Caleb that bracelet said more than any letter, check, or interview ever could. She remembered, she cared. She was still carrying them with her. He swallowed hard, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with hope. For the first time in weeks, the ache in his chest shifted, not vanished, but softened. Rewritten into something gentler. She'd gone, yes, but maybe not forever, and maybe, just maybe, she was waiting for him to follow. The sun hadn't risen yet when Caleb pulled out of the driveway, the truck rumbling low beneath him, headlights slicing through the mist that clung to the road like a secret. Emily was still asleep inside, curled beneath a blanket, unaware that her dad had packed an overnight bag and filled the tank with more hope than direction. He didn't have an address, no itinerary, no map marked with X's or dots or dashed lines, just a name now, Maline Sinclair, and the weight of everything she hadn't said but somehow left behind. The truck's cab smelled like old coffee and motor oil, the glove compartment still stuffed with tools, receipts, and one tiny crayon drawing labeled Daddy's Fix-It Castle. He reached for the radio but didn't turn it on. Silence suited him better. It had always been her language, after all. He wasn't running away. He was chasing something he couldn't explain. A laugh she let slip while wiping grease off her wrist, the curve of her name as she scrawled it into Emily's storybook, the tremble in her voice when she said, "I'm not who you think I am." And maybe she wasn't, but she'd shown him who she wanted to be. That counted for something. The road unfurled ahead of him like a ribbon dropped by fate. Interstates, back roads, exits he didn't recognize, towns too small to be remembered by GPS. He stopped for gas once, staring blankly at a billboard that read, "Sinclair Motors, the future drives here." He laughed bitterly under his breath. The future might drive there, but Caleb was following something older, something real. He didn't know what he'd say if he found her, didn't know if he'd be welcome, but the not knowing didn't scare him anymore. She left quietly, but not carelessly. And a woman who wears a child's bracelet in front of the entire world, that's not someone who wants to be forgotten. So he drove on, through sunrise and miles of doubt, into a story with no roadmap, into the open, into nowhere. Which, if he was being honest, felt exactly like the place where everything had begun. The Sinclair estate didn't look like a place built for people. It looked like it had been constructed for impressions. Stone walls taller than memory, wrought iron gates that seemed more decorative than necessary, and a driveway that curved out of view like it had secrets of its own. The hedges were cut too perfectly, the silence too intentional. Caleb sat in his truck outside the gate, engine off, fingers tapping the steering wheel. He felt out of place before he even got out. His shirt was clean but wrinkled, his boots still stained with oil from the last job he finished before leaving. But he wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for her. He walked up to the gate, rang the intercom, and waited. Static crackled. "Do you have an appointment?" a clipped voice asked. "No," Caleb replied. "Then I'm afraid we can't." "I'm here to see Malene Sinclair. Tell her the mechanic stopped by." A long pause followed, then silence, and just like that, the line went dead. He stood there for a while, unsure what he expected. A summons, a guard, maybe just a voice that told him to go home. But the gate didn't move. No one came. He turned back toward his truck, heart tightening. Maybe he was too late. Maybe she'd made peace with what they were, what they weren't, and buried it like an old tool never meant to be used again. Then a small voice behind him said, "You're the mechanic, aren't you?" He turned. A girl stood just inside the gate, maybe 9 or 10, dressed in a private school uniform, hair in braids, clutching a book too big for her hands. Her eyes were wide, curious, and unafraid. "My aunt talks about you," she said. "The man who fixed her car and didn't ask for anything." Caleb stepped closer to the gate, heart now lodged somewhere near his throat. "Your aunt? Is she home?" The girl smiled, one dimple deepening. "She's in the greenhouse. She always goes there when she's thinking too hard." And then, without another word, she ran off toward the house. Caleb looked back at the gate, and this time it opened. The greenhouse stood at the far edge of the estate, half hidden behind manicured hedges and flowering dogwoods, its glass panels glinting in the afternoon sun like a secret waiting to be confessed. It didn't belong to the rest of the property, too wild, too honest, plants spilled from clay pots and tangled over workbenches, the air humid and sweet with jasmine and mint. Caleb stepped inside quietly, the door creaking just enough to announce him. She was there. Barefoot, her heels kicked off near the door, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, dirt smudged on her forearm like she hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. She was kneeling beside a bed of green sprouts, gently patting soil around their roots. She didn't look up at first, just pressed her hands into the earth like it could steady her. Then, softly, "I thought you might come." Caleb didn't move closer yet. I wasn't sure I should. Now she looked up, different than the woman on the screen, different even from the one who had swept his garage floor. No mask, no guarded poise, just Malene, tired, barefoot, and entirely herself. "I wanted to come back," she said, "to explain, to say goodbye the right way, but I didn't know how." He stepped forward, hands loose at his sides. "You didn't owe me anything." "No," she said, standing slowly, brushing soil from her hands, "but I owed myself the truth, and I didn't think I could speak it until I left." Caleb watched her, eyes steady. "Then speak it now." She exhaled, slow. "I built a company trying to prove I deserved my father's name. I spent years in boardrooms, convincing people I belonged there. And the higher I climbed, the lonelier I got." Her voice wavered. "I didn't know who I was anymore, only what I was supposed to be." He nodded once, quiet. "So I left," she continued. "No press release, no entourage, just me, a car I barely understood, and this idea that maybe I could find someone who saw me without the name, the money, the noise." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "And I did." Caleb stepped closer, just enough to feel her breath between them. She smiled then, small, real. "I'm not running anymore." And for the first time since she vanished, he believed her. The air in the greenhouse felt thick, not with heat but with something deeper. Possibility, regret, hope that hadn't dared speak its name in weeks. Malene leaned against the edge of the wooden potting table, her fingers idly tracing the rim of a clay saucer. She wasn't speaking like a CEO anymore, not like a guest or a runaway, just a woman who had been hiding so long she nearly forgot she didn't have to. "I need to say something," she began, voice low, eyes fixed on the floor. "When I showed up at your garage, I didn't have a plan. I wasn't trying to play some game. I wasn't testing you." Caleb stood still, letting her speak. "I was trying to remember what it feels like to be safe." That word hung between them, trembling like a glass set too close to the edge. "I thought," she continued, "if someone could meet me without all the noise, without the name, the reputation, the shadow of $1 billion company, I might finally see who I really am. Not the woman in the articles, not the boss or the brand, just me." She looked up now, and he felt it, how raw she was behind the calm. "You didn't ask questions," she said. "You didn't dig. You just helped. You saw me and didn't flinch. And I—" Her voice cracked, but she caught it. "I ran when I should have stayed, because I didn't trust that kind of kindness could be real." Caleb stepped closer, close enough now to see the thin layer of soil still on her fingertips, the worn bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. Emily's bracelet. She still hadn't taken it off. She met his eyes. "Do you think we could try again?" A pause. A breath. "This time," she whispered, "without lies?" Caleb didn't smile, didn't move to touch her. He just looked at her the way he did when inspecting an engine, careful, deliberate, like something valuable lived beneath the surface. "I think," he said quietly, "we were always just one truth away." And for the first time the question didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a beginning. The return to Maplewood wasn't announced. No headlines, no press release, just the soft roll of Caleb's truck down the two-lane road lined with pine trees and rust-colored leaves. Malene sat beside him, hair down, hands in her lap, watching the familiar roads like they were pages from a story she had once been too afraid to finish. She didn't wear sunglasses this time, didn't shrink from the town's gaze. She looked out the window like someone finally ready to be seen. When they passed Norma's cafe, Caleb watched as her name began to ripple through whispered conversations like smoke catching light. Malene Sinclair. In Caleb's truck. Back in Maplewood. But this time she didn't flinch. He pulled into the gravel lot beside the same old motel, peeling paint, a soda machine that still blinked out of order. Room 6's door sat slightly crooked, like it hadn't been opened since the day she left. Malene stepped out of the truck, looked at the place for a long moment, then walked into the office and asked to speak to the owner. By sundown, the papers were signed. She didn't renovate it to luxury. She didn't raze it to the ground. Instead, she turned it into something honest, a shelter for women on the edge of starting over. The kind of place she wished had existed when she'd needed to vanish, when she was more shadow than person, more fear than name. She called it the 6th room. No ribbon cutting, just an open door, soft beds, hot meals, and dignity without a price tag. When Caleb told Emily they were having a guest for dinner again, she clapped her hands and asked if they could make lasagna. "Only if Lena helps," she insisted. Malene laughed. "You mean Malene?" Emily shook her head stubbornly. "No, I mean Lena. That's the name you had when we met you. It's still you." That night they ate at the same table as before, same plates, same mismatched silverware. Only this time there were no hidden names, no secrets tucked under folded napkins, just a man, a girl, and a woman who'd finally come home by choice. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops, casting long golden streaks across the front yard when the screen door creaked open and Emily stepped out, barefoot, cradling a handful of wildflowers she'd picked from the edge of the property. Caleb was still unloading groceries from the truck when he heard her gasp, sharp, joyful, and utterly certain. "Malene?" He turned in time to see the flowers scatter from Emily's hands as she broke into a full sprint across the grass, her little legs kicking up dust and dried leaves. Malene had barely stepped out of the passenger side when Emily collided with her in a tight, messy hug that nearly knocked them both off balance. But Malene didn't stumble. She dropped to her knees, arms wrapping around the girl who had once handed her a bracelet with all the trust in the world. Her eyes squeezed shut as Emily buried her face in her shoulder, clinging, like she'd been waiting forever. "I knew you'd come back," Emily whispered, the words muffled but steady. "I told Daddy you would." Malene pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "You did?" Emily nodded with that kind of innocent certainty only a child can manage. "Because you didn't say goodbye. People who don't say goodbye aren't really gone." Malene smiled, tears threading the edges of her lashes. "I was scared." "I was too," Emily admitted, then added with a fierce little shrug, "But Daddy said sometimes people leave to find themselves, and sometimes they come back stronger." Malene laughed through the tears, cupping Emily's cheek with her hand. "Your daddy's a smart man." Emily grinned. "He is, but he missed you a lot." "I missed you both," Malene whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. From the porch, Caleb watched the reunion unfold, heart full in a way it hadn't been since before she vanished. And in that moment, watching the woman who once hid behind silence hold the child who never stopped believing, he knew something had shifted for good. This wasn't a return. It was a promise. The new sign went up on a Wednesday morning just after sunrise. Hand-painted by Malene herself, letters traced with the kind of care that only comes from rebuilding a life one brushstroke at a time. Caleb lifted it into place while Emily danced below with a paint-streaked face and 2 thumbs up. Turner and Sinclair, Honest Auto. The name looked strange at first, too big, too official, too different. But the moment the last bolt was tightened and the sunlight hit the wood just right, it didn't feel strange anymore. It felt earned. Inside, the garage smelled like fresh oil and fresh beginnings. Malene had brought order to the chaos. Color-coded bins, a new booking system, an actual coffee machine that didn't growl when it brewed. But she didn't turn it into something unrecognizable. She left the worn tool chest Caleb refused to replace, the dented stool he always used, the crooked clock that never kept time but always marked memory. The first project under the new name wasn't a flashy one. No exotic engine or high-paying customer. It was a beat-up yellow school bus from the local elementary school parked just outside the garage, engine rattling like a cough that wouldn't quit. They could have charged for it. The district had budget, barely. But when the principal explained it would take weeks to get kids to school without it, Caleb glanced at Malene, and she didn't hesitate. "We'll fix it," she said. "No charge." They worked side by side for hours. Caleb elbow-deep in the engine, Malene sorting parts and passing tools, Emily drawing smiley faces in the dust on the bus windows. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But when that engine finally turned over smooth and strong, the sound echoed like a promise across the lot. A promise to do things right, to build something honest, to give back what the world tried to take. That night, as they closed up shop and turned off the lights, Caleb looked up at the sign once more, Turner and Sinclair. 2 names, 1 story, built not just with tools, but with trust. The garage hadn't changed much. The walls still bore the scuffs of 1,000 repairs. The old radio still played the same 3 stations, and the scent of grease, metal, and something faintly sweet still clung to the air. Caleb stood near the open bay, wiping his hands with the same faded rag he'd used for years, though the calluses in his palms had softened slightly with time. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the lot where a little girl, now much older, Emily, 16 and taller than her father ever expected, was teaching a younger kid how to check oil. Inside, a teenage boy leaned against the tool bench, wide-eyed, waiting for the end of a story. "So," the boy asked, "is it true? She just showed up one day, in a broken-down coupe?" Caleb smiled, slow and thoughtful, eyes drifting to the photograph on the wall. Malene, in coveralls and smudged glasses, laughing over an open hood. Emily beside her, holding a wrench with way too much confidence. "Yeah," he said softly. "She showed up with a car that wouldn't start, a name that wasn't hers, and a look in her eyes like she didn't believe in anything anymore. The boy leaned in. "And you knew she was someone important?" "I didn't know anything," Caleb chuckled, "except that her hands shook when she handed me the keys, and that no one fakes being that tired." He looked around the shop then. Turner and Sinclair still painted above the door, a little faded but strong. The same garage, now full of new stories and honest work, the kind of place where people came not just to fix what was broken, but to be reminded that they mattered. "I fixed her car," Caleb said, glancing out the window where Malene was helping a neighbor rotate their tires. "But her heart, that was different. I didn't fix it. I just gave her a place where she didn't have to hide it anymore." The boy nodded slowly. "So that's what love looks like." Caleb smiled again, grease on his hands, soot in his hair, and warmth deep in his chest. "Yeah," he said, "sometimes love looks like that. Covered in grease. Quiet, real, and worth every second.